Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Trends channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The late afternoon sun slanted through the high windows of the Abbott mansion, casting golden streaks of light across the polished hardwood floors. Claire had not intended to stop by, but something in her heart urged her to come, to check on Kyle, to see if the tension between them could be eased. For weeks she had sensed distance, an invisible wall Kyle had carefully constructed, brick by brick, as though shielding himself from a truth he refused to confess. She thought perhaps it was stress, perhaps his struggle with family obligations or the endless drama of Jabot, but Claire was a woman who trusted her instincts. And her instincts whispered of secrets. She told herself she was being paranoid, that her insecurities were painting shadows where there were none. But still her footsteps carried her silently through the hall, her pulse beating like a warning drum. The mansion was quiet, but not empty. She could feel it, that subtle shift in the air, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. As she approached the guest wing, she heard a faint sound, muffled laughter, followed by a sigh that was not meant for her ears. Claire froze, her hand tightening on the polished banister. She recognized Kyle's voice, low and husky, softened in a way she had not heard directed at her in weeks. Another voice joined his, distinctly feminine, teasing, breathless. Audra. The realization sliced through Claire like a shard of glass. Her mind raced with denial. It could not be. Perhaps they were merely talking. Perhaps it was an innocent conversation that happened to sound intimate. Yet her heart knew better, trembling inside her chest, aching with the cruel edge of recognition. She forced herself forward, her legs moving stiffly, each step heavier than the last, the silence between sounds broken again by another burst of laughter. This one unmistakably drenched in desire. Claire's breath caught, her throat burning as her world began to tilt. The door to the guest room was ajar, just enough for Claire to glimpse what she prayed would not be true. And then she saw them. Kyle's hands tangled in Audra's hair, his body pressed urgently against hers. Their mouths fused in a kiss that burned with hunger. Clothing lay scattered like discarded promises across the rug. Kyle's shirt tossed carelessly on the chair, Audra's blouse lying crumpled near the bed. Claire's vision blurred, her fingers digging into the wood of the doorframe, as though it were the only thing holding her upright. Her soul screamed in silence, a soundless cry of betrayal that lodged in her chest. She wanted to storm inside, to tear them apart, to demand why, but for a moment she could not move. She could only watch, paralyzed, while the man she trusted and the woman she despised writhed together in a betrayal so raw it left her shaking. Her heart pounded like thunder, each beat hammering against her ribs, louder than the soft moans that escaped from the room. Claire bit her lip until she tasted blood, desperate not to cry out, desperate not to collapse on the spot. Every moment that passed deepened the wound, seared the image into her memory, carved it into her very being. Kyle's voice rose again, murmuring words meant to seduce, words that once upon a time he had whispered to her in the quiet of night. And Audra's laugh, smug, knowing, triumphant, echoed like poison. Claire pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, terrified of the sob that threatened to escape. She wanted to turn away, to run, to erase the image before it shattered her completely, but she could not. She had to see. She had to know the full measure of his betrayal. To face the truth she had dreaded but now could no longer deny. The opulent silence of the Chancellor Mansion was a lie, a carefully constructed facade of old money and older traditions that did nothing to muffle the sounds coming from the second-floor guest room. Claire had been moving through the grand halls with a lightness in her step that was entirely new, a buoyancy born of recent absolution and the fragile, budding hope of family. She had come looking for Kyle, wanting to share a trivial, amusing thought about something she'd seen in the garden, a silly observation she knew would make him smile. That was the nature of their renewed bond, wasn't it? These small, shared moments that built a bridge over the chasm of her past mistakes. The door to the room he was using during his separation was slightly ajar, an invitation or an oversight, and she approached it with the unthinking ease of a sister who believed herself welcome. The first sound that stopped her in her tracks was not a word, but a laugh, Audra's laugh, low, throaty, and intimate, a sound that did not belong in this house, in this room, with her brother. It was a sound that coiled in the air, thick with a meaning that made the fine hairs on Claire's arms stand on end. Her hand, which had been raised to push the door open fully, froze in midair. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, began to pool in her stomach, a stark contrast to the warmth she had felt just moments before. It was a primal warning, a signal from some deep, instinctual part of her brain that screamed at her to turn back, to walk away, to preserve the fragile peace she had fought so hard to attain. But her feet seemed rooted to the polished hardwood floor, her body betraying her mind's desperate command to flee. She heard Kyle's voice then, but it was a version of his voice she had never heard before, a husky, breathless whisper, laced with a desire that was both familiar and utterly foreign. He murmured Audra's name, and it wasn't a question or a greeting. It was a statement of possession, a plea, a prayer. The two sounds, Audra's laugh and Kyle's whisper, intertwined in the hallway, creating a dissonant chord that shattered Claire's perception of reality. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Not after everything. Driven by a horrifying, masochistic compulsion, Claire took a single, silent step closer, her body pressed against the door jamb as if seeking its solidity to keep herself upright. The sliver of space between the door and its frame offered a view that was at once fragmented and devastatingly clear. She saw the discarded jacket, one of Kyle's expensive blazers, crumpled on a chair. She saw the soft, lamplit glow illuminating a tangle of limbs on the rumpled sheets of the bed. And then she saw them. Audra, her head thrown back in ecstasy, her fingers tangled in Kyle's hair. Kyle, his back to the door, his shoulders tense with an effort that was both passionate and desperate. They were a portrait of raw, unvarnished passion, a scene of such intense physicality that the very air in the room seemed to crackle with it. It was a private universe of two, a world from which Claire, and the entirety of his marriage to Summer, was violently, completely excluded. The visual confirmation was a physical blow, a sucker punch to her soul that drove the air from her lungs in a silent, painful gasp. This was no innocent flirtation, no momentary lapse in judgment. This was a full-blown, consuming affair, playing out in the heart of the home that was supposed to represent a fresh start for their entire family. Time seemed to warp, stretching and contorting around the horrific tableau. A minute felt like an hour, the sounds of their passion, the ragged breaths, the soft moans, the rustle of sheets, amplifying in Claire's ears until they were a deafening roar that drowned out all other thought. She was a statue of grief and betrayal, her wide, disbelieving eyes taking in every detail, branding the image onto her memory with the searing heat of a brand. This was the brother who had stood by her, who had looked past the darkness and seen a person worthy of redemption. This was the man who had spoken so eloquently about family, about loyalty, about doing the right thing even when it was hard. And here he was, entangled with a woman whose ambition was as sharp as her cheekbones. A woman who represented everything their family was supposed to be wary of, all while his wife, Summer, was away, presumably believing in the sanctity of their troubled marriage, and while his young son, Harrison, slept innocently in another room, in another home, unaware that his father was systematically dismantling the foundation of their family. The hypocrisy was so vast, so profound, that it felt like a black hole, sucking all the light and hope out of Claire's newfound world. A single, hot tear traced a path down Claire's cheek, followed quickly by another, a silent, scalding testament to the devastation unfolding within her. She didn't make a sound, her grief too immense, too consuming for something as simple as a sob. It was a seismic shift in her entire reality. The ground upon which she had so carefully begun to rebuild her life had just crumbled into dust, not by her own hand this time, but by the hand of the person she had come to trust most. The betrayal was multifaceted, a poisoned blade that cut in several directions at once. It was a betrayal of Summer, a woman who, despite their complicated history, was the mother of Kyle's child and his lawful wife. It was a betrayal of Harrison, an innocent boy who deserved a stable home. But most piercingly for Claire, it was a betrayal of her. It was a betrayal of the trust she had placed in Kyle, of the fragile sibling bond she had cherished, of the shared understanding that they were both, in their own ways, trying to be better people. By engaging in this sordid secret, Kyle had made a mockery of her own redemption. If he, the golden boy, the moral compass, could fall so spectacularly and live a lie so easily, then what did that say about her own struggles? Her own hard-won progress felt cheapened, tainted by his actions. Memories, unbidden and cruel, flashed through her mind with the sharp clarity of shattered glass. Kyle's hand on her shoulder, steadying her during a panic attack. His voice, firm and reassuring, telling her she was a Newman, that she belonged. The way he had defended her to their grandfather, Victor, insisting she deserved a chance. All those moments, once treasured as beacons of acceptance, were now cast in the sinister light of his duplicity. Were they just words? Empty gestures from a man who was, himself, living a profound lie? The Kyle in those memories and the Kyle in that bed seemed like two different people, and the cognitive dissonance was physically painful. She felt a fool, a naive child who had believed in a fairy tale of family unity while a snake coiled in their midst. And Audra, who had always watched the Newman dynasty with the calculating eyes of a predator, had now sunk her teeth into its very core. Was this her play for power? A way to embed herself in the family through its most vulnerable, or most willing, male heir? The manipulation was so transparent, and the fact that Kyle was blind to it, or worse, complicit in it, made the entire situation even more sickening. Finally, as if the weight of the sight had become physically unbearable, Claire forced herself to move. She took a stumbling step backward, her body trembling violently. The floorboard beneath her foot creaked, a small, innocuous sound that in the heightened silence of the hallway echoed like a gunshot. For a terrifying second, she was certain they had heard her, that the passionate sounds from the room would cease and be replaced by the shocked silence of discovery. She pictured Kyle's horrified face, Audra's smug, triumphant stare. The humiliation of being caught witnessing her own betrayal was a layer of agony she could not bear. She pressed herself flat against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, holding her breath until her lungs burned. But the sounds from the room didn't stop. If anything, they seemed to intensify, lost once more in their own private world. They were oblivious, wrapped up in their desire, utterly unconcerned with the wreckage they were creating just a few feet away. Their obliviousness was, in its own way, the final, most profound insult. She turned then and fled. She moved down the grand staircase on unsteady legs, her hand gripping the banister so tightly her knuckles turned white. The opulent artwork, the gleaming surfaces, the very air of the mansion now felt oppressive, tainted by the secret festering in its upper room. She burst through the front door and out into the cool night air, gasping as if she'd been drowning. Leaning against a stone column, she dragged the fresh air into her lungs, but it did nothing to cleanse the feeling of contamination that clung to her. What was she supposed to do now? The knowledge she possessed was a live wire, charged with the potential to destroy everything. If she confronted Kyle, it would shatter their relationship irrevocably. He would be angry, defensive, and the brother she thought she knew would be gone forever, replaced by a stranger caught in a lie. If she told Summer, she would be the messenger, the one who delivered the blow that would obliterate a marriage and devastate a young mother. Summer would be destroyed, and the fallout would be nuclear, engulfing Harrison, the Newmans, the Abbotts, everyone. And if she told her grandparents, Victor and Nikki? The thought sent a fresh wave of cold dread through her. Victor Newman did not tolerate disloyalty or threats to his family's stability. His reaction would be swift, merciless, and unpredictable. He had just welcomed Claire into the fold. How would he view the bearer of such catastrophic news? But the alternative, saying nothing, carrying this vile secret inside her, felt like a betrayal of her own. It made her complicit. It meant she would have to look Summer in the eye and pretend everything was fine. It meant she would have to endure Kyle's presence, his touch, his brotherly affection, all while the image of him and Audra was seared onto the back of her eyelids. The weight of the secret was already crushing her, a heavy, dark stone in her chest that made it difficult to breathe. It was a poison, and if she kept it inside, it would inevitably eat away at her from the inside out, destroying the fragile person she had worked so hard to become. This was the cruelest twist of fate. After a lifetime of being on the outside, of being the villain, she had finally been given a chance to be part of something good, something pure. And now, through no fault of her own, she was being forced back into a role she despised. The keeper of a dark secret, the one whose knowledge made her dangerous and isolated. She was trapped in an impossible dilemma, a prisoner of a truth she never wanted. Back in the mansion, unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in their world, Kyle and Audra lay entwined in the afterglow, the air thick with the scent of sex and secrecy. For them, this was a stolen moment of passion, a risky but thrilling escape from the complexities of their public lives. They whispered promises and plans, their conversation a low, intimate murmur that spoke of a shared future, a defiance of the constraints placed upon them. They saw themselves as star-crossed lovers, fighting against the world for their happiness. They had no idea that their world was already beginning to fracture, that the foundation of their secret had been cracked the moment Claire's disbelieving eyes had witnessed their betrayal. The chain of events set in motion by that single, devastating discovery was now inevitable. The fallout would be swift and merciless, tearing through Genoa City with the force of a hurricane, and at the center of the storm would be Claire, the accidental witness, whose hard-won peace was the first casualty in a war she never saw coming. The silence of the night was no longer peaceful. It was the calm before the storm, a deceptive quiet that held its breath, waiting for the first domino to fall, for the first tear in the fabric of their lives to widen into an irreparable chasm, changing the landscape of their family forever.